basically my parents were both Nisei, which works out to be that they were born in the 1910s or 1920s. I mean, they were both 1920s, but the combination of when the Meiji Restoration started in 1868 and when immigration was allowed by Japan and when the US started restricting and then completely stopping immigration, that made it so the Nisei were this distinct generation that grew up during the Great Depression in the 1930s and came of age during World War II. And on top of being Nisei, my parents were both Kibe Nisei, which means they went to Japan. They were sent to Japan to be raised by relatives when they were really young, like infants or toddlers. And they came of age in Japan. So they never knew the United States until they were American citizens, but they didn't know the United States until they came over. And after the war, it was very, very common for Japanese American males to have the job. Almost the only job they could get was Japanese gardener. So that's what my father became, a Japanese gardener. And he also bought a chicken ranch that we worked as well. And I grew up in this rural area of Los Angeles County where there were no Japanese, and maybe once in a while, but they would move away, and even no Asians. It was all Hispanic and white. So my mom was very gregarious. So every weekend she would pack us up and take us over to, most of the time it was to her older sister's home, my Auntie Sachi. And her husband was my Uncle Bob. And Uncle Bob was an amazing uncle. He taught me how to throw baseball. He could catch with me. If you were a kid, you loved Uncle Bob. And then in parallel with this, as soon as I was old enough to go to kindergarten, my mom enrolled me in Japanese school at this place called the Southeast Japanese Community Center in the city of Norwalk. And Norwalk is, as you can tell by the name, it's southeast of downtown LA. And she became very involved in the community center, and she eventually became president of the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association. And it was during that time that she suggested that my Uncle Bob start a Kendo dojo at Norwalk, at Southeast Japanese School and Community Center, which he did. He did this in 1964. And I had no idea that my uncle was Hara Akio Sensei, a very big sensei. I didn't even know what Kendo was. When I saw it, I thought, well, that's weird looking and weird sounding. And of course, the smell was amazing. But I didn't care about that. I really, if it had anything to do with Uncle Bob, then I was in. So I started at the age of 9 at Norwalk Dojo when Norwalk Dojo started. My first sensei was Hara Sensei, and he was an amazing sensei. He as I said before, I didn't know he was such an important and good Kendo sensei before I joined Norwalk Dojo, but he had Tenouchi in both hands because he also could do amazing Nitoryu. But practicing with him, you could feel what it was like to get hit with a really nice strike with Tenouchi. I mean, it never hurt. It just felt amazing. And you try to copy that and hit him back the same way. And basically that's how he taught, which was perfect for me because I was very athletic. I always learned by trying to watch and copy and understand, but I didn't like to learn by words. So, and he didn't teach by words. Even I think I noticed after I left, I practiced other places besides Norwalk Dojo. It's very, very common for the kenshi to line up at the end of practice and go up, thank the sensei, and then also receive quite a bit of words of advice, and he never did it that way. If he had advice, he would give it to you right when he was practicing or after practice. So it was, like I said, that's how I really like to learn, and he taught that way. Of course, it's possible he understood that that's how I like to learn, and he adjusted his teaching to everyone, because that's also what he was very good at, was teaching to everyone at their own level. And whatever they needed to learn, whatever they needed to correct, he would just provide that at that moment. If you talk about Kendo in America, the state of California was always very central to Kendo in America, especially in the beginning. From the political power sense, it was definitely California, especially Southern California. And this kind of led to some problems within the whole, the rest of the regional federations around America, and actually the U.S. Federation ended up fracturing late 80s, and then finally about 5 years later they came back, and when they reformed, it was much better for all the regions of America. More regions had representation, and things were more transparent. I think recently it's becoming less transparent, but we'll see how that goes. But if you talk about where is Kendo the strongest, that is also California. I think one pretty kind of data-driven way to see that is U.S. championships. U.S. Kendo championships started being held in 1978. So from 1978 to 2017, there were 14 championships. There was supposed to be one in 2020, but obviously COVID-19, there was no championships. So of those 14 championships, the men's team championship, 4 of them were won by Northern California Kendo Federation, and the rest, the 10 other ones, were all won by Southern California Kendo Federation. So no other region ever won a men's championship. And women's team championship started in 1987, so there were 11 of them. One time Northern California Kendo Federation won, and 10 times Southern California Kendo Federation won. And similar story in the individuals, although there were other people. Occasionally there were other federations winning in the men's and women's, but pretty much it was California. And so I think just because of this legacy, which I think also is pretty obviously driven by population size, California, and Southern California in particular, remains the strongest and the largest federation in the United States. And my federation in particular, Southern California Kendo Federation, SCKF, is still the largest, and I guess you could say the strongest, just based on the team championship results. If you have a large male population, then some proportion of that is going to be female. And if you have one regional federation that only has, let's say, 10 females to pick for their 5-member team, and let's say another federation has 100 people, then most likely the one with 100 people is going to get a lot more level of competition and competitive strength. And also the population is supported by a large number of sensei as well. But if they're a really good sensei, they're a really good teacher, they teach males and females equally well. I mean, it's not like, I've never heard of a sensei that's only good at teaching males and not females, or vice versa. So yeah, sensei population, just the raw number of population, that is going to help women, I believe. The first World Kendo Championships I attended was in the second WKC, which was held in Los Angeles. So I was actually asked to help out as a timer on the court. This was an amazing experience for me because I had never seen such a large tournament and so many competitors and so serious and such a high level, especially from the Japanese team. So that was very awesome. Unfortunately, it was a very busy time for me too because I was just graduating high school and going into figuring out which college to go to. So I don't actually remember a lot from that championships other than being completely overwhelmed. Then the next one that I went to was actually the 5th World Kendo Championships in Sao Paulo in '82. So what happened there was I have another uncle who started Kendo after me at Norwalk Dojo, and his Kendo was more kind of happy-go-lucky. I don't know how to explain, but he loved Kendo and he loved to travel for Kendo, and he let me know, me and my husband know that there was a big sensei, Eto sensei. He was one of the early SCKF presidents and very important in the US level. But it turned out his kind of hobby was arranging these amazing trips to go along with the World Kendo Championships. Then that's why I signed up to go to Sao Paulo. The trip that Eto Sensei planned was really amazing too. We went to Sao Paulo. We visited lots of places in Sao Paulo that were of special interest to Kendo people. For example, I still have this really awesome ironwood bokto. It's so heavy. I think it's heavier than a iaito. And we went to Rio de Janeiro, Iguazu Falls, and Machu Picchu. I mean, he was also famous for kind of cramming a lot of interesting things in there. So that was a very amazing trip. And the next one was 1985 in Paris. So that one was kind of very unique for me because in 1981, I won first place in the US championships for women's individual. And then in 1984, I expected to do very well, but kind of recently started working. I had some money. I bought some bogu, and all bogu came from Japan. So it took months and months and months to arrive, and it finally arrived about 3 weeks before the championships. And like an idiot, I tried to break in this bogu in that 3 weeks before the championships. And what happened was, I was put it on during break times at work and lunchtime, and I was just trying to do suguri in the parking lot. And what ended up happening was I drove the dye, and they used to use a lot of dye, I guess, into my forearms. And I basically gave both arms a really bad chemical burn. And in fact, when I went to the dermatologist, I don't know how it is where you are, but in Southern California, if there's a dermatologist, they tend to kind of group together. So she was in a complex with a lot of other dermatologists. And when she saw my arm, she actually called all of the dermatologists to see my arms. And so I knew then this was something special. I mean, it was bad. And so I ended up doing very badly in that US championships. And actually I wanted to quit Kendo. I was so disappointed in myself. But we had already booked this trip to Paris, and my husband he committed himself to making me change my mind. And so I decided to go anyway. And it turned out at this, the Paris World Kendo Championships in 1985, there were maybe 8 or 10 women from the US, and all of the top ones that had finished in the top places the previous year were there. And luckily I had healed from that experience. And even though I had not really practiced, I was able to compete. And, as you know, Kendo is mostly about your mind, not necessarily your body. So I was able to have my Kendo come out either directly beat or do better than those other, U.S. women. And so I got kind of my confidence back, and I was able to not only win first place at the Goodwill, Ladies Goodwill there in Paris, but also have the will to continue on in Kendo. One thing I mentioned about this Paris tournament when I tell people, back in those days, at the World Kendo Championships, they had to have the national anthem for every country, even though it was only ever Japan's national anthem playing. And this time they played the US national anthem, and that was just over the top. It made it just an unbelievable experience for me to hear that. Before then, I always kind of thought of myself as more of a Japanese American, and after that, then I really felt the American part of Japanese American. The next World Kendo Championships was in Seoul, another very awesome trip by Eto Sensei. We went to Seoul, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Xi'an, Shanghai, and Beijing, and of course the Great Wall. Let's see, next was World Kendo Championships in Paris again in '94. That was terrible because my mother had just passed away in March, and this tournament was in April, and I shouldn't have gone. It was, and then the next one I attended was World Kendo Championships in Kyoto in '97 as a spectator because they didn't really have the elimination tournament for the U.S. team. I was too rushed or something, and they went off of the results of the U.S. championships, and I didn't do very well in that. I didn't do well at all in that tournament, so I couldn't make it on the team. The one after that was in the 11th World Kendo Championships was in Santa Clara, so Northern California in 2000, and I did make the team for that one, and I was very happy because the women's team was able to win third place, so I have a third place medal for that championships. But the thing that I remember is we lost to Japan in the semifinal, and I was the captain, and I had to fight the Japan captain, and I almost got my favorite point, which is Tobikomi Do. And I thought, I must have held back or something, because that is my favorite point. And then Japan met Brazil in the final, and the Brazil captain scored that Tobikomi Do on the Japan captain. So I was, I wish I had done better, but it was still a really awesome experience there too. And then the next World Kendo Championship was 2003 in Scotland. And even though I'm getting very, very old by this point, as you can tell by the years, I was able to make that team. But, and the coach or the manager was Hori Atsushi Sensei, a really great sensei in Southern California too. Unfortunately, he just passed away in COVID-19 a couple of months ago. But I was really looking forward to him being the manager or coach, but he wanted me to be the women's coach. I wanted to be a team member, but he wanted me to be the women's coach, and I kept trying to say no, but you cannot say no to Hori Sensei. So eventually, I'm okay, but I knew nothing about being a coach. I think I do better now because I've been the head instructor, at Mohawk Dojo for 15 years, but then I knew nothing. But luckily it wasn't a problem because Hori Sensei did all the coaching. I just had to help, and got the same thing with the women's team, and sort of just try to take care of the women's team members. But I guess FIK kind of changed the rules of who could be manager of a federation's contingent, and it had to be someone who had American citizenship, which I obviously had since I was born in Los Angeles. But Hori Sensei and even the men's coach had applied for American citizenship, but it was so slow in coming that they had to put me in as the manager for the US. So that's why my picture has manager underneath it. But it was all 46 Paulo. That was, yeah, the last one that I actually attended. But I do have, from watching the first one through at least 2003, I do have some impressions how the World Kendo Championship did change in that time. And I think the overwhelming impression I have is how extremely dominant the Japan men's team was in the beginning. There was no way to beat them. And so, I think they knew it too. So their cleanest, straightest Kendo came out, and they would still win. But starting in, yes, even in the Sao Paulo one in '82, Korea was fighting Japan in the finals. And it happens that Hano Sensei was one of the Shimpan in that match. It wasn't, that close, but I think Korea could have almost won one or two matches, which would also have been a first to even win a Japanese senchu. So I don't remember if I actually heard boos in the crowd, but there was a lot of complaints of how the Shimpan were biased for Japan, and it was unfair. And I know that Hana Sensei took that very, very sadly to hear that. And then when I went to the 1988 World Kendo Championships in Seoul, it was even more intense. The finals were Korea and Japan, I think, for the men's. And my husband and I were sitting in the middle of a sea of Korean fans. And when Japan won, they were very angry. It was actually scary, and throwing things down into the court. And I think from that moment on, the matches were getting closer and closer for the men's final. And I think the one in Scotland, it came down to a playoff match between Japan and Korea. And I don't remember the name of the Korean player, but the Japan player was Ega Sensei. And I feel so lucky to have been there in the hall, sitting on the floor while that match went on and on and on. And when Ega Sensei scored that last ski point, yeah, it was, his fumikomi is so strong, and the whole floor reverberated, and we could feel it in our bodies. That point was such an amazing point. And so I feel really fortunate to have been able to see that. But it seems like the World Kendo Championships, the men's finals, are getting closer and closer and closer. And so it seems like the Kendo is becoming more and more sports-like. I can just imagine the pressure that's on the Japan team not to be the one that loses to Korea, but there's this kind of this extra element. When I started Kendo, it was not about the strategy of not losing. It was completely about giving an honest fight to your opponent, and just letting it all go. And whoever won, both sides would hopefully feel really good, because it was a very good match and a good point. And I still see that happening with the Japan women's team, with the women's Kendo, because they are so dominant. Then most of the matches are very nice to see and very inspiring. So I think that's probably going to continue for a while. So the main experience I had at being the women's coach in Scotland for the 12th World Kendo Championships, we had a really, actually very strong team for that championships, and I kind of expected that we would at least place, you know, do very well. But what happened in the morning? In the morning, there's an individual championships, and in the afternoon is the team championships. So in the morning, first of all, one of our strong team players didn't do well. She had kind of a mental meltdown, and I had spent a lot of time getting her back so that she would even, you know, fight for us. And then we had two very strong competitors who made it to the best 8, and they both happened to get Korean opponents. And these matches were so long. I think they were 25, 30, maybe even you know, more minutes long. They were fighting really hard that whole time. And me being the coach, I had to sit in Seiza that whole time, you know, across from the Korean coach who was also sitting in Seiza. And so I'm like, I can't bring my Seiza, even though I had practiced sitting Seiza before I left for Scotland. I still didn't expect to have to sit there for not one, but 2 matches. Both of those matches went, I think, over 30 minutes. And so not only was I wondering, could I walk after this, but both of those strong players were exhausted, and especially, you know, very disappointed because they ended up losing to those two. And we had to go in with this team just a couple hours later. We had to, or maybe 1 hour later, we had to start the team matches. And I mean, we still did kind of okay considering how that was, but I think when I noticed when Japan goes in, they don't have one team that does both individual and team. They have a team that's mostly the individual and another team that's mostly the team, and maybe 1 or 2 players overlap. But you know, we couldn't afford to do that even in the US, and I can just imagine that most countries cannot do that either. So until that is changed somehow, I think it's going to be very hard for women's other teams other than the countries that can do that, provide 2 teams so that there's no morning and afternoon competition. Whatever countries can do that, I think they're going to have a very good chance to dominate. Yeah, so this summer camp in 1992 was yet another trip that my uncle Koji told me about because he was going. And so I'm like, yes, that sounds very interesting. And it turned out that was the very first time I had ever done Kendo in Japan. It was also happened to be the very first time that Gedatsukai had built a brand new giant dojo. And our camp attendees were the first ones to practice there. So they told us that we were the first ones that would start smoothing the floor with our feet. It was kind of true. It wasn't, you know, that smooth. It was fine, but I was in a group, Godan and above group, that practiced in the old dojo, and so I feel very lucky that I, you know, happened to. Oh wow, it's this floor so smooth. Again, first time I had ever done kendo on a floor made for kendo, and above all, the sensei that were teaching us, they were like top Hachidan sensei, and it was just very amazing. And since I think when I went, it was 2 weeks long. So we covered a lot of material. We got to interact with the sensei. And I remember asking one of the Hachidan sensei, if you're Hachidan, how do you practice? How do you improve your kendo? You know, you don't have a 9th dan sensei to practice with you. And the answer he gave me was so amazing. He said he uses, of course, basics, but the thing he mentioned that really stuck with me was he uses kirikaeshi. to improve his Kendo, and that made so much sense for me because I don't know, when you just practice basic, it's very easy to just sort of get into the same timing and whatever, only practice one or two elements. But in Kirikashi, there's so many elements and so many ways to use it to improve so many different things. Like you could use it to improve your ki or your footwork or your even tenroji. Everything you can use Kirikashi. So yeah, that was awesome. Hara Sensei, and I feel so mortified that I didn't understand fully how important he was and how basically great he was until our 50th anniversary, when I took on the job of writing a biography of him for the program booklet. And that's when I really dug into his past, and that's when I found out he was a very important person in the years before the war, because he was able to learn from this really pioneering sensei named Nakamura Tokichi sensei from Japan. So this might sound stupid, but I think it's best if I just kind of read it. In 1929, Nakamura Tokichi sensei arrived at Terminal Island, and within a year, the dojo membership there grew from 25 to 100. Nakamura sensei then went on to establish Kendo dojo in Central and Northern California, as well as Oregon and Washington. By 1934, Hokubei Butokukai was formed with Nanka Kendo Renmei in Southern California as its first member. And according to its publication, the Hokubei Kendo Taikan, which was published in 1939, Hokubei Butokukai had 10,000 kenshi, 6 regional renmei, and over 60 dojo along the West Coast. It conducted annual tournaments at different locations, ran summer and winter training camps, and held promotional examinations. And Nakamura sensei also provided special training to develop future instructors. And it turned out Hara sensei was one of those who trained under Nakamura sensei and became one of his top 3 uchideshi, and traveled around with Nakamura sensei to all of these places in California, Pacific Northwest, and even to in Japan, Korea, and Manchuria. So yeah, he actually has a small section, and many of his pictures appear in this Hokubei Kendo Taikan publication. And this is a picture with Nakamura sensei is in the center, and Hara sensei at the age of 19, looking very young, is sitting there, and it was taken at Terminal Island. It turns out in June of 1995, this picture is of Hara sensei and his wife, my aunt, and then in the middle is Nakamura sensei's son, and to the right of Hara sensei is Fujino Tamae sensei, Nakamura sensei's daughter, and to the left of my aunt is Nakamura sensei's granddaughter, and actually in this particular picture is Eto sensei. So they came to Los Angeles in 1995, and it turns out these were the last pictures ever taken of Hara sensei, because he died 2 days later. So just learning all of these things, again, for the 50th anniversary program write-up, and again, I just feel so sad that I couldn't appreciate all of these things about Hara sensei before he passed away. For me, all of my best Kendo came out when Hara Sensei was active at Norwalk Dojo. And the earliest days of that, we practiced in the old Gakuen building, which was really small. It was a very small dojo. But I really liked that setting because I don't know, you didn't do so much running around. You just practice kendo and very sincerely, and you learn not to back up because if you backed up at all, you would be against the wall. In 1977, Norwalk, the community center, built a big new gym, and we started practicing in there. It's still one of the largest places to hold practices in Southern California, so a lot of times we're asked to host Team SDKF practices. The type of parents and kenshi, just the population in general, has changed, but I think it's basically the same changes that have been occurring in other parts of society, where in the beginning, parents always stayed and watched practice, so the kids knew that they were not only being watched, but that the parents would see when they did something well, when the sensei praised them or taught them something new and they did it well, because especially Hara Sensei would always make sure to go and look at the parents to make sure that they saw that their kid had done something amazing. And so that was also part of his teaching process. And he spoke whenever necessary to give advice to the for the kenshi to the parents. And the parents took really good care of the sensei. There's always a lot of discussion between the adults, and the kids got to go to play. But these days, it has become more and more where the parents, nobody's watching the practice, and nobody stays after the practice either. And this is very different from when I started. But I think it's, like I said, just how families are just so busy now, and kendo is just one of many activities, and they only have so much time that they can spend on certain things. So I feel kind of sad that it's not the way it used to be, because when I was a kid, I was very, very, very busy too. But somehow it was just known that kendo night the whole night was for kendo. Norwalk Dojo is very large. We would have a lot of girls, and when it's small, we would have fewer girls. It's sort of proportional, but there's always, for example, one group that stands out to me in the mid-90s, there were a group of high school girls that were all very close friends in high school. They all decided to join kendo at the same time, and they were awesome. They were really good at kendo, very supportive. Really, they brought a terrific vibe to the dojo by being there. And one by one, some went to the army, some moved away, but eventually one of them actually came back after she graduated from architecture school in Berkeley. She came back to Southern California, and she's been a member of Norwalk Dojo ever since. And she is awesome. She takes care of us. Once again, this is Hara Sensei, and wow, talking so much about Hara Sensei, getting choked up, and I'm not sure I can actually recover from this. But I guess when he passed away in 1995, the family asked me to do the eulogy, which hands down the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. And as I, kind of talked to them about Hara Sensei, what I should say, I just had this feeling that maybe I had not lived up to his expectations. Or, I guess when I think of him, I try to think of making it so that I'm not disappointing it. For my Kendo development, I don't tend to focus on, and actually this is any area of my life, I don't tend to focus on a specific person of how to, as a model or a mentor. I just pick certain things that I think I should look into more and understand better, and maybe it'll help me. So, you know, when you asked me to write the article of thinking outside the box, my reaction was, how did you know I'm always thinking outside the box? That's me, you know. I can't help it but to think outside the box. So I'll bring whatever ideas and principles. I try to read and watch and, you know, understand as much as I can, just in case it comes in handy for some completely unrelated area. So that's kind of my approach to everything. My first trip to Japan was actually with my husband's family. We had just gotten married in 1978, and this trip was in 1980, and it was his parents and all of his siblings. He has two sisters and a brother. I was a little worried because, you know, in-laws, but luckily they are all fantastic people, and we traveled like all over all of the common tourist spots, and including going all the way up to Hokkaido and you know, Sendai, Matsushima, those types of places. But the thing that I remember, I don't know who decided, but we, my husband and I, decided to ask his uncle to take us to someplace to buy an iaito. Actually, I wanted to start iaito back in the early days of Norak Dojo because two of the assistant instructors there they had just started learning a couple of years before coming to Norak Dojo from the famous Mori Kodama sensei. Both Kendo and Iaido, and they would practice Iaido at Norak Dojo, and I really thought it looked very cool, and I wanted to learn it, but Hana sensei told me that I should wait until I got Kendo Shodan before I started Iaido. So when I finally got Shodan, and Hana sensei actually gave me an Iaito. So when I learned Iaido, I was dealing with that. But since we were in Japan, we decided maybe I could find an Iaito that I would buy. And so, yeah, his uncle somehow found a place. It wasn't even a Boguya shop. It was some department store that had an Iaito, I guess. And so I bought this, and it turned out it was too long. It was too heavy. When I got it home, I realized I couldn't use it for Iaido. And so that was, but it was a memory of that trip. And it turns out, you know, in all of the years that I've been doing Kendo, I've been always trying to train on my own on the side, in addition to going to the dojo. And I bought basically every sugurito that you can imagine as soon as it came out. But I finally realized that the perfect sugurito was this Iaito that I had bought in 1980. And I use it every day, I don't know, for the last decade or two. And then one other trip that I took to Japan before going to Kitamoto was in 1987, I believe, with my mom. So as I mentioned, she was Kibe Nisei, came over after the war. She had not been back to Japan for 40 years. And this was her first time. And it turned out, of course, in Japan during school, she learned Chuji and, you know, all of the typical things that Japanese children learn back in those days. But when I went off to college, she dove back into Shuji or Shodo. And she was very talented, and she quickly became sensei and traveled all over Southern California to teach. And even her works were won prizes in Japan. And in fact, in the 1980 trip that I took with the Kodama family, one of the stops we made was to visit a display of one of her works in Ueno Museum. So anyway, this trip that she went back to Japan was with her Shodo group. I just kind of joined in at the tail end of it and kind of tagged along with them for a few days. And then after that, my mom and I took a week to go back to her hometown, which is in Wakayama-ken. It's a tiny little fishing village along the southern coast, which actually is an amazing scenic drive along that coastline. And that was also very moving because I guess it's a small village nestled among steep hillsides, so there's only room for a family to have basically one house, and one child can stay there, and then all the other children have to leave, go to other parts of Japan. And so when we got there, she was able to say, this house belongs to this family, this house belongs to that family, and whatever. And because of that process, I guess. And when we went to visit her, the home where she grew up, by that time it belonged to, I think, her second or third cousins, but they were very nice. They let us come in. They served us an amazing dinner. And she showed me her room. Her room was just one tatami mat. That was her room. And I think at that moment it really sunk in the hardship that the Kibe Nisei could have undergone, because there's this kid dumped on the family that I think she was raised mostly by her grandmother, that may not even have room for them, let alone a burning desire to raise them. And she would often tell us growing up that we were so lucky to be raised by our own parents. I didn't understand until that moment, seeing her tatami mat, what that really meant. And so, yeah, that was pretty amazing. Fujino Tamae Sensei appears in that one of the last photos of Hana Sensei. I did have a chance to meet her, I think 3 times in Japan, and every time she has been so kind to me, and going so far as to say that we're shinseki because of the relationship with her father and Hana Sensei. And yeah, she is just awesome. Her practice that I attended has so many really awesome female Nanara Sensei in there too. So it was great practicing with them. And she herself is so intense, very intense. And so, her practice starts with kata, and wow, every time I come away with, yes, this is how kata should be performed. Thank you, Tamae Sensei. And unfortunately, it's always around the time of the Hachinan test, and so the practice always has to end early, because all the wives, the Nanaran Sensei wives, have to go watch their Nanaran Sensei husbands go off for the Hachinan test. But it's always been a very amazing experience. Well, I mentioned the first time I thought of quitting just before the 1985 Paris tournament. In 2007, I tore my left knee pretty badly, and it was like in the beginning of the year. I'm blaming Iaido and a new set of kata that I had started practicing. But I still managed to make the women's team, win the place up on the women's team, CKF women's team later that fall, but in doing so, I realized my knee was really bad, and finally I got an MRI. It was very torn up. Not just the meniscus was torn, but I had bone damage on the top of the tibia. And anyway, I finally withdrew from the team. I got an operation the next year, and it was much worse after that. Much worse. And I had minor operations, like I had some wrist surgery, disc ganglion, but because of that, I ended up only being able to, because of the scar inside, I only ended up being able to bend it this much instead of, much further that it should be. So I didn't want that to happen with my knee. So when I was on the painkillers, I worked really hard to make sure I would have the range of motion to do seiza, sonkyo, and I even used that taking advantage of having the painkiller to kind of break the adhesions in my wrist so I can actually bend it more. But I never was able to do kendo. To me, I completely lost my kendo. My kendo before was based on being able to come from any distance, far or near. Now I couldn't even hit from near. I just lost everything. I couldn't hit anything, especially do, my favorite point. And almost daily since that moment, I have thought of quitting kendo. So the thing that kind of kept me going for a while was, even though I couldn't, in my mind, I couldn't do kendo anymore, I was still able to do enough to continue to make Team SCKF, which is a pretty big feat, Team SCKF being so strong. So as long as I could continue to do that, I thought, well, okay, maybe the rest will come. But unfortunately, the last time I tried out for Team SCKF was for the 2017 championships. And 2 weeks before that elimination tournament, I had a major accident at the dojo where I got knocked back. I went skidding. I thought I had fractured both hips and my elbow was bleeding. But what I didn't realize was that I had a really bad concussion, traumatic brain injury. And even with no brain, I almost made the team. But it was a good thing I didn't, because it turned out it took me almost 2 years to not feel like I had scrambled eggs for brains whenever I did kendo. Finally sort of recovered from that. And then in 2019, I had a major thing happen with my left foot while I was doing kendo. The way it felt, I think it's similar to how I've heard people describe when they tear their Achilles tendon. All of a sudden they go, and then all of a sudden their foot is just flopping and they can't control it. That's kind of what happened to my foot, except that I apparently tore like 7 different structures in my foot. And there was an intense pain as well, which I don't believe is always there for Achilles tendon tear, but pain, swelling. I couldn't even hop even 1 inch off the ground. It took me about, 6 months to get back to that. And I think I put on my men, maybe it was October, and then November was another Team SCTF elimination tournament, and I stupidly went and tried for that, and I made the team. This was a new team called Senior Women's Team, but I still had to, win some people, and I just barely made it. So even with all of these injuries, I still have these little things like, well, maybe it'll come back. It's not just that keeps me going. It's mostly the obligation that I have. Once I was made head instructor at Norwalk Dojo, which I really didn't want to do. But at that point, even, Kenshi that were junior to me had given a try to do an instructor, and then they had to resign. And so now there's nobody left but me to be the head instructor. And I'm trying to make it so that the next person who also doesn't want to do it, can take over as an instructor. But that's basically, it's the obligation, the responsibility. And kind of part of it too is, I don't want to disappoint Hara sensei. Keeps me kind of going there, not stopping. But almost every day I'm thinking, wow, I don't know if I can continue. And I have to say that COVID-19 actually was kind of a godsend, because, having to go to the dojo, even though I'm trying not to stress my foot or my knee or I also have a really bad shoulder. I mean, there's only recently that I can even reach over this far to touch my shoulder. Before I could only go about this one. Because no practice, and I'm not torquing all of these body parts that are injured, it gave me a really good chance to rest, number one, and work on only, certain areas, and really, Google and YouTube and whatever, find different things and try them out, and it just helped a lot. Mm-hmm. So thank goodness for COVID in that one small sense. Because my husband, David, without him, I mean, there's no way I would still be doing Kendo. He's been so supportive, even from the time that that we met at Caltech. We met going to college. We were just really good friends, both interested in martial arts. He was shocked that I was interested in Chambara movies, very pleased, and eventually we started dating. And from the beginning, he was very fascinated with my doing Kendo and the Aido, and he's always there at pretty much all my matches, videotaping me and supporting me, in whatever way he can. I just really do not deserve him, and so grateful to him. So I think that is a very hard question for me to speak about, because because of my background, especially, I never thought of Kendo as having a female component to it. It's just Kenshi coming in. Sometimes Kenshi are small or tall or short, or, maybe hefty. It's part of Kendo to figure out how to do Kendo with your body type. And I'm not sure I could say, even within women, there's no one short, tall. Yeah, everyone is different there as well. So I guess for me, I don't see that big of a difference in actually doing Kendo. One quote came to mind. I just heard this somewhat recently. There's a saying, you never step in the same river twice. For one, it's not the same river, and also you're not the same person. And over all these years of doing Kendo, I'm 66 now, so when I was 9, so many years of doing Kendo, that has proven itself over and over and over. Whatever you did Kendo at one point, it's gone, and you just have to figure it out for right now. And I think that's one of the amazing things about Kendo is it's not, you can only do Kendo once when you're this type of strength and this type of height, or whatever. Kendo you can do for your whole life because you're always figuring out how to do it for your current stage and your current condition. So there's another quote that I saw very recently, and it happened to do with something about women's role models or something. The quote was, "You can't be what you can't see." And so the implication was, if you don't have a role model, how are you going to become good in that area? Or how do you even know that you can be in that area? Again, I have never found that to be true for myself. I mean, if I was the only girl in SCKF at times, what does that mean? I have to quit because there's no other girls? No way. I'm just doing Kendo. I'm just doing whatever. I'm being an electrical engineer. I'm being, whatever. So I think I would, I've said this to my students at times too. If you say the words, I can't, whatever, I can't come on time, I can't come on Friday, it's not true. What you have to, if you use the words I can't, then you must follow that with the word unless. I can't unless. And then you figure out, oh, what's the unless? How can I do this? And I just kind of stumbled on this concept as part of my engineering work. I completely stuck in a design, and I'm like, wow, what am I going to do? The whole project's going to fail because I can't figure out how to do this. And then I'm like, because I can't. This can't happen. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Unless this happens. And then I'd be, oh, that can't happen. And then I would find, oh, unless this. And then you kind of go around, and maybe it's a, funny, convoluted path that, you can step back and say, oh, that's convoluted. This would be a criminal. But sometimes the only path is convoluted. So that's part of what you need to figure out. It's not that you can't be this. You can't be this unless. And so I guess that would be my advice to anyone. Always have that unless word in there that you're figuring out.